If you are a beginner in magic, manifestation, mysticism, or the occult, you are going to want to listen up today. Because today I have a roadmap for you. This is going to help you progress from beginner to advanced. It's going to help you get to where you are creating a better life for yourself and those around you. If you are tired of being lied to and being stuck as a perpetual beginner, stay tuned for some honest, on-the-ground knowledge in the unseen arts. Hello everyone, I am Solomon Pakal, and today I want to bring you some facts and some lessons learned from over 20 years in occult experience. While I have a basic amount of respect for anybody that takes on the path, I am proud to say that I did not simply learn the occult via online resources. I was raised in a culture where this stuff was real time and a lot of people were doing it, and they were doing it for very high stakes in real life situations. I've also collaborated with a lot of big names in the occult, a lot of small but very, very powerful people in the occult. And I want to give you a no-nonsense approach to tackling the unseen arts. So over the course of my several interviews and over the course of listening to many interviews from many influential names in the occult, insert your favorite YouTube channel or favorite occult podcast. And typically what will follow at the end are, what are your best tips for beginners? I hate this question because usually what follows, or the context surrounding the question and the discussion, is typically more advice to keep somebody perpetually beginning. The advice usually goes along like, you gotta work hard, you gotta study hard. Or it could include some feel-good motivational jargon, which, while none of these things are incorrect, they are most certainly incomplete. There's nothing much more actionable out of that besides just doing more. And in these kinds of statements, defenses, I will tell you that you can get away with a lot by doing more. In fact, you can solve a lot of problems by simply doing more. More often than not, people just aren't doing enough of the same things. However, if people are still circling around to the same kind of beginner books, how-to posts, and how-to videos, they aren't progressing. So I believe an additional reason that keeps this cycle of beginnership continuously going is that nobody has defined the developmental stages of magic. It's either you're a beginner or advanced, or there is this mysterious middle ground that people kind of refer to as intermediate, but nobody really has defined what it is or the common traits, even if not everybody's on the same kind of definition. There has been no efforts to really kind of suggest that there are common traits in an intermediate versus like a beginner. You know, beginners just kind of have beginner vibes. I've heard the time and time excuse of, well, you can't really put definitions and labels on witchcraft, the occult, and all this stuff because we're just all so different. And to that, I say that's a very lazy excuse. Because if you look at the difference between scientific fields or like the martial arts, I'm much more versed in martial arts. Martial arts are very different from each other. However, developmental stages carry very similar traits. That's why there are belt levels. There are also economic reasons of why there's belt levels, but the belt levels help kind of distinguish individual capabilities. This is very helpful because when you're training with other people, it does help to have a yardstick of like, how can I train with this person? Can I go all out? Do I need to cut it back a little bit? Oh, this person's much better than me. Maybe I need to be a bit more crafty. Maybe I need to be a bit more careful. Maybe I need to voice my concerns a bit quicker before things can get out of hand because this person's just on another level. So defining these essentially tiers of skill is actually, it's necessary. And the various occult communities throughout the ages have largely failed at this. There are ranks and stuff in secret orders or esoteric orders, but those are largely based upon administrative authority, and sometimes they can blend in skills. But the waters get muddy because it eventually becomes like what benefits the organization better, what benefits the organization the most. So it's not all about capabilities. So we need to define these things. If we can define beginner, intermediate, and advanced, now we can start progressing because we have a bit more tangible route. We have a roadmap that can help us get from one point to the other. So let's define what the beginner is. The truth is, as a beginner, you're just learning how to survive. You're learning how to have a magical worldview. Even if you believe in magic, the reconciliation between the real world, quote unquote real world, the more materialistic worldview and materialistic perceptions, and a magical worldview, they may be at conflicts with each other. Because the truth of the matter is that the world is magic. What isn't magic are perceptions and worldviews. Yes, even hard materiality in many native cultures is simply an extension of the divine. This is the true nature of animism, not simply everything has a spirit so you can start talking to a toilet seat or something. It is understanding that there's a difference in perception. One could argue the beginner stages of magic is decolonization, because you are trying to decolonize the mind from a hard materialistic worldview that doesn't want you to see the divine into something that sees the divine everywhere. Now, at this stage, you're going to be experimenting a lot. You should be researching a lot. You should be studying a lot. The goal at this stage should be to recognize, what do you need to do in order to accept a more magical worldview? And besides simply just trying to believe harder, the easiest way and most practical way is to develop your psychic senses. Because as a beginner, you have very little command over your psychic or clairvoyant senses and clairaudience and all of that, right? You have very little command over it. So the goal here should be to find exercises and getting a lot of repetitions in to sharpen those psychic developments. Because if you're going to interact with bigger levels of the spiritual paradigms, you're going to need spiritual senses. Now, you may have already had some like paranormal experiences or spiritual experiences, but this is potential. And this is kind of like when a high school track athlete or something, some kind of high school athlete, shows up day one at practice and they have never done the sport before, and then they are quite impressive and the coach says they're impressive. However, if they took their capabilities to a competition, they may not be ready for it and they may lose because they haven't actually trained. They have a lot of raw potential. So a part of this too, especially in the modern day, a lot of people are like, well, I've been told this and I've been told that. And they think they're a bit more advanced than they actually are. A little bit of humility is necessary here. You do have to practice. You do have to train at this stuff. Like if you want to get better. Now, if you want to just take what you got and then try to make some stuff happen, okay, more power to you. But if you start to plateau, then here's your thumbs up that you got to train. Now here's the green light to start training those psychic senses and honing in on those. Even folk magic cultures have ways of developing those senses. And from what I understand after like really bouncing between cultures and cross-training with people of different, specifically minority-led traditions, for some reason the training mechanisms, they don't really like tell you how to do those. Like you got to like really study with somebody. They kind of keep those close to the chest. But the thing is that you don't need some like super secret Yoda teacher to start learning the psychic senses. Like really, I think even a lot of famous paperback books, they've got good enough like of a starting point for you. So you can start there and continue to build those skills. Now, there are specific pitfalls at each stage, because each stage essentially carries a mentality. So every mentality is going to have its own kind of like biases and pitfalls. And the pitfalls that typically happen to beginners or befall on beginners are expecting results too quickly, especially with the advent of like witch talk and more influencer based witchcraft. There's a lot of narratives placed upon people just getting started about like how super special they are and whatnot in magic. And it leads to them having unrealistic expectations about results. And part of the solution with getting over the results is correcting your perception of magic in general. As I said, the big beginner problem is getting over a worldview problem. And specifically the worldview surrounding magic is a part of that like materialistic worldview problem. Materialism says that like magic isn't real, right? But materialism also says that if magic is real, it has to be this instantaneous, like very Hollywood style thing. And magic, the occult manifestation, is much more subtle than that more often than not. Yes, miracles can happen. Yes, real-time manifestations can happen. Almost instantaneous or like barely any wait time, right? It can happen. But more often, no. More often than not, no. Getting over the perception, detaching the cultural stereotypes of magic as an instant fix is a part of overcoming the pitfalls as a beginner. It's part of overcoming the worldview that holds magic back and holds you and your occultism and magic back. So part of developing the patience for magic is a part of developing past beginner stages. And my recommendations for a beginner to progress to the intermediate stage is you have to find ways to get lots of reps in. This means lots of reps with developing your psychic abilities, and it means finding simple ways to spellcast, simple and safe ways. And I say that because you're going to need a lot of reps, even if the reps are kind of bad to begin with. You have to learn how to do bad reps in order to do good reps when you're starting out. So quantity has a quality of its own in this regard. And the only way you're going to get enough quantity is if it's safe enough to do so. So this is why, yeah, like demon stuff and like dark stuff is not good to do for even advanced people, but especially beginners, because you can't do it all the time. Like it's not, even like a lot of good types of magic that are just like so heavy though. And they're so big, such big efforts. You're not going to be able to repeat this in a way that is going to develop you. You need to find simple ways to do it. That may not even be candle magic, believe it or not. A lot of people look at candle magic, they kind of see it as like beginner. And it's actually, it's a bit more, it should be a bit more purposeful than people think. You got to understand, if you want to have a fire hazard on in your house all the time, it's not as readily available and deployable as you may think. But I'm not talking down on candle magic. Candle magic is part of my cornerstones in my practice. But you may want to find more simple ways to start getting repetitions in. This is kind of where the manifestation culture like begins, but also stops because they don't really do anything else besides very minimal based things. And there are economic reasons and grifts why that is the case. But yes, find ways to get a bunch of repetitions in. And we're talking about like, if you want to go hard for 3 months, yeah, I think that's a great way to start. Because once you've gotten past that, you're getting into the intermediate stage and the intermediate phase. So what is an intermediate in the occult and magic and spirituality? What does an intermediate phase consist of? This is what I like to call the sampler phase. This is when you're really broadening your horizons. Different from when you were a beginner, because when you were a beginner, you were just researching broadly to kind of get acquainted with the overall idea of magic. Whereas as an intermediate, you are starting to dive into the modalities of magic. So before, you may have not known, you may have heard, like as a beginner, you heard about what voodoo is and you heard about what Hinduism is. You thought you knew what it was, but then you take a closer look and you're like, oh, this is a lot more expansive than I actually thought. And you're having that kind of like worldly humbling experience. Whereas now you are trying to do different modalities of magic. And it doesn't mean specific, it doesn't mean like culturally specific. It can be culturally and like pantheon or paradigm specific, but it can also mean like kind of technique driven, dependent. So now you're doing candle magic, and then another day you will do, or another week you'll do energy work, and then another week you'll do sigil magic. And then you'll try spirit evocation for the first time or something like that a couple of months down the road. You are trying a bunch of different things because now you're putting to the test these psychic developments that you have developed. Because you are putting to the test the psychic skills that you have developed. Now, I do caution intermediates to, like, if you do practice these things and all of these different like modalities of magic, it is important to kind of keep them separate and keep them kind of kosher to their own systems to avoid cultural appropriation. But it's not simply cultural appropriation. Mixing things that come from different paradigms and have different like spiritual mechanisms, they don't work together that well. Now they can work together like in a much more holistic fashion, as if they're done at different times and different settings, because it's, you know, they're still having an effect on your life. But doing them together is a no-no. Like doing like ATR Orisha worship alongside runes, that's just all kinds of like not just out of touch racially, but the mechanisms are different. They don't speak through. You should not be trying to use runes to talk to Orishas. Like, that's all kinds of disrespectful, but also the paradigm uses its own divination system to specifically talk to Orishas. You talk to Babalaos, even tarot is not sufficient. It's not like a kosher way to talk to Orishas. So I urge you, if you're going to do runes one day by themselves. If you're going to do I Chang, do one I Chang by itself. If you're going to do evocation of some kind of celestial spirit from a grimoire tradition, then do that on a separate day and away from any other like kind of cultural elements. The purpose here is to develop a broad array of skills in occultism. At this stage, you should be starting to get results. It doesn't mean that everything you throw hits, but results are coming in somewhat consistently, and you can spot them. This is where you can start having real discussions with people, because you kind of know a little bit more about what you're talking about. But you can walk into group gatherings that, you know, talk about esoteric things. You can walk into metaphysical stores and start having real conversations, and you'll have stories of like your experiments and whatnot. Now, there is a specific pitfall for the intermediate. Because this stage is so colorful and so intoxicating, because you are, you know, amassing all of this experience and you are becoming capable in the unseen arts. There is this idea that starts to develop that more is better, and the more techniques you can acquire, the better you are as an occultist or a practitioner. And you think the more that you know it and can practice a lot, it means you're more powerful. But this is the quintessential jack of all trades and master of none. Sadly, this is where a lot of people get stuck, is here, because they have jobs at metaphysical stores. The idea to kind of stay semi-broad in order to sell products kind of keeps people here and keeps people like wanting to stay broad. But this is like treating magical systems and techniques like Pokemon cards. And it's going to have kind of a paper weight to it as time goes on. A lot of people's practice will actually diminish because they just stay here, but in reality, you're either getting better or you're going backwards. And typically what will happen because of this just constant consuming of broad knowledge, they're actually getting worse because they're not focusing. So they essentially master things at a mediocre level, and it's not adepthood. So what should an intermediate do? Well, the thing is that the sampler phase, I have found to be essentially like the longest phase out of most people's occult careers. Because you think about it, you're really, really going broad here. And it just, in the 21st century, when we have like a broad knowledge of the occult and spirituality, it just makes sense. So, this can take years. The intermediate stage can take years, and I think that's a really healthy thing to do because it can dispel a lot of ignorance. It will show you just how big the world is, and you will get to experience it. So what should an intermediate do? The truth is that the intermediate should start trimming the fat of their practice. You could argue that the whole point of the intermediate stage and trying out all these different things is to find out what you actually do like and what you're really good at, and then doubling down on that and committing really, really hard. Intermediates may be like good at kind of a bunch of things, right? Jack of all trades. But there may be something where in their practice, one or two things that they could be fantastic at. That's where they should focus, and they should put everything else to the side for the meantime, and then go from there. Pay attention to what comes naturally. Pay attention to what is getting the best results and start doubling down. Pay attention to what excites you and focus on that. Remember that specializing is not limitation. It is focus. It is sharpening the blade. Because this is what leads to becoming an actual advanced practitioner. An advanced practitioner is a systems specialist. I have seen this within my own group. I have seen this with various groups, that the best practitioners, they've had a broad understanding, but when push comes to shove, they are really good at like one or two things, and they can leverage that very, very well. This means that they have a go-to system of magic at which they have a high success rate. Advanced practitioners have like old faithful routines, techniques, and protocols that can handle everything from small matters to absolute dire situations. I think if you are baking results at like 60% success rate, and say your typical time lapse comes, and I'm getting a little nerdy about numbers here, but it's just for the sake of tangibility to kind of relate to. It doesn't mean you have to don't pay attention to these numbers super hardcore. But if you're running a clip of like a 60% success rate, and I would actually argue anywhere between like 40% success rate to 60% success rate, and say massive manifestations happen within 3 to 6 months, those are like your big ones, you are in advanced territory. Systems specialization can come in a variety of ways. It could mean that you are good in magic that crosses cultures, or you are specifically highly proficient in one culture's type of magic. So here's an example I like to give. So you may find practitioners that are advanced that are highly, highly proficient at energy work. Spirit stuff is not their jam, but chakras are. Now, say they have such a knack for energy work that they kind of bridge over into Reiki as well. Well, now they're advanced. That kind of idea, they could be advanced with Reiki and chakras, or just one. It's not really, there's not a hard criteria for that. On the other hand, like if spirit magic is your jam, there are highly proficient, highly advanced practitioners out there that specialize in like the greater key of Solomon, more celestial types of intelligences. And they will never touch Goetia. They may never even touch the rest of the books in the Solomonic canon. Then you will find people that specifically specialize in all the Solomonic canon. But both of these examples are advanced practitioners. They simply have their own style and preferences of doing things. Here's a personal example of mine, and that is, I mentioned that I come from an indigenous Maya tradition. Mayan magic can come in a variety of flavors, dependent on region and subculture. I typically recognize 10 different modalities of Mayan magic. Now, at some point, though, my natural talents and interests really leaned hard into two modalities. That would be deity magic or deity worship, deity work, and cosmology or cosmological structures. And to this day, even though I'm proficient in all of these modalities of Mayan magic, my go-to silver bullet will always be a cosmological or deific kind of framework and rituals. That is where I place essentially like my signature moves. Like if we were thinking we were competitive martial artists or something, think about the advanced systems as like your signature moves, kind of. It has to be a little bit more broader than simply one or two moves. It has to be a system that builds upon one to the other, to the other, to the other. I would say actually intermediate stage is when you start to develop your individual signature moves. And then when you're advanced, you are kind of chaining around and building around those signature moves. And now you have signature qualities. And it's highly flexible, highly adaptable kinds of strategies and metas around your signature moves, i.e. signature moves become signature qualities, systems. The most common pitfall with advanced practitioners is that advanced practitioners kind of develop superiority complexes. This is because they typically have gone through the intermediate stage where they tried all these different things, and then they actually focused and got concentrated on a specific form of magic, and they found that the results were exponentially better. So what it leads them to believe is that, wow, I tried all these different things, but it's this stuff that has really gotten me the results. And just because of reliable results, they just think it's better. And it's not after one or two results. It is after consistency and time. So they think that's good reason to kind of believe in a superiority complex. What they fail to realize is that magic is contextual, and what works for one person may not work for another, because really magic and the occult is just like everything else. Specifically, I'll pull from my background in combat sports. We are spiritual athletes, essentially, and this is kind of like a sport. And people are going to have different spiritual athletic gifts and capabilities and essentially like their structures and biomechanics. There are like spiritual equivalents of those things. So not one system is going to work for everybody. This is like really common when, people get into paganism and mysticism and stuff to kind of break away from organized religion. But organized religion will have essentially magic and subsections of magic. Like the grimoire traditions, for instance, right? But people don't want to be saying the names of Jesus and God because they're like trying to run away from that. Therefore, based upon their own kind of history with religion, Christian magic is probably not the healthiest route to go down. So to avoid this pitfall and to progress past advanced, because yes, there are levels past advanced, what should advanced practitioners do? This is where cross-training, finding and collaborating with other practitioners is absolutely necessary. This is the power of group ritual. I have seen it time and time again. Some of my most rewarding experiences on the path have been working with a variety of different practitioners in various parts of my life. But this meaningful cross-training and comparative analysis broadens your worldview unlike any book. There is a knowledge that is exclusive to the arenas of experience. And as an advanced practitioner, I would probably argue that you hit the majority of what you're going to get out of books. Not all the time. There's some profound works out there that can impress an 80-year-old sage, right? But this is where you have to get very human, and you have to relate to other humans that are practicing these things, which is honestly much harder and much more rare than training in isolation or something. You have to practice with people of other traditions. This is where you're comparing notes, asking for advice, and sharing stories even more. But you're sharing them with a purpose rather than simply to share like in an intermediate stage. You have to be willing to admit when someone else's approach may be better than yours, given the context, given the people involved, given the specific problem. Mind you that you do not have to adopt every technique, but you have to begin to understand why other people are getting results with methods that are different than yours. This deepens your comprehension of magic, and the more advanced you get, techniques matter less and comprehension matters exponentially more. This roadmap is meant to help you. It is not meant to rush you. These are more manageable and digestible checkpoints that can help you evaluate where you are and what you need to do to keep going the way that you want to. Magic is real and it works. The occult is real and it works. If you want to support my work, have early access to YouTube material, and exclusive access to my signature series, please subscribe to the Mystery Codex on Substack. Or you can go to solomonpakal.com. That'll take you straight to that publication. For readings and Mayan astrology birth chart packages, go to mayanmysteryschool.com and book now. And show my Instagram some love, solomon.pakal. Until next time.